All right, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us on today's webinar, which is ForeFlight for Europe Fundamentals. This is our first Europe-specific webinar in our ForeFlight on frequency webinar series that is targeted specifically for Europe. And so this one will be going over some of the basics of using ForeFlight in Europe. And next week at the same time, next Tuesday, we will have a ForeFlight for Europe power users presentation, which goes over some of the more advanced features and advanced workflows within ForeFlight. So be sure to go and register for that and attend that if you'd like to see the full spectrum of features from fundamental to advanced in ForeFlight. Our presenter today is Josh Tahmasebi. He's the product manager and designer for Mapping and International. So what that means is that he is not only juggling all of the new features related to mapping within the app, but he's also the primary product manager of ForeFlight in Europe. And so he is the one who is talking with you all on different forums, listening to your feedback, answering your questions, and just really advocating for all of the new features that you all have been requesting and have been looking for to make ForeFlight more useful and allow you to make your flying more efficient in Europe. So he's really your guy, and he's the one who is looking out for everything you guys need. So just a couple of quick little things before we get started here. If you need to ask any questions, you can do so using the Go to Webinar message panel on the right. You just click that question mark button and that opens the panel, and you can ask us any questions you have during the webinar. We'll be responding to some of the questions live during the webinar, and many others will be responding to simply over text. And then at the end of the webinar, there will be a Q&A session where we'll respond to many of the other questions. Also, at the very end of the webinar, just after we end it, there'll be a quick survey. So if you wouldn't mind just taking 30 seconds to fill that out, that allows us to gauge what you thought of the webinar, what you think of ForeFlight, and it allows you to submit any suggestions you have for future webinars. This webinar is being recorded, and we will follow up with a link to access it on our website, as well as register for other future webinars in the On Frequency webinar series. So with that, I'll hand it over to Josh, and he can kick off the presentation.
Great, thanks, Sam. And good evening, everyone. Like Sam said, my name is Josh Tahmasebi, and we're going to go through the fundamentals of using ForeFlight in Europe. So the way that I've broken down this presentation is geared towards both people who have been using ForeFlight for a while and maybe missed some of the fundamentals, and then also for new folks as well, because we know ForeFlight is still a newer product in Europe, and I just want to make sure that we go over some of those important pieces. So the key areas that we're going to be looking at today are: how is ForeFlight organized? How do we do some of the pre-flight planning and weather checks? What are some in-flight safety features and alerts? Some quick post-flight information, some discussion of what's coming in the future, and then we'll have Q&A. I've also worked in spots along the way to have Q&A as well. That way we can answer some of the questions on the various areas. So I wanted to talk first just very briefly about starting ForeFlight for the first time, because there's a lot that can come up right at the beginning. The first thing that will happen the first time that you get ForeFlight, and some of you may have seen this, may have not even realized this was here, is it will actually ask you for your location. This is really important, and the reason why is this is how ForeFlight gets access to the GPS built into your device. So if you hit don't allow, you can always go and change this in your iOS settings under privacy, location services, and ForeFlight. But if you ever have an issue with ForeFlight's not seeing where I am, or it's not tracking my flight, this is one of those key pieces to remember. But it walks you through briefly, and there's only a few steps to get started. You would get this sign-in page, and you can either log in with the account that you created when you signed up, or you can create an account right here. It'll ask you for your email address and password. So that's the other key piece. There's no username. That username will be your email address. So that's important to keep in mind. And then it will move on to just a quick flash where it'll show you your subscription is valid until a specific date. And then you'll get the ForeFlight user agreement screen. You are obviously welcome to do with this screen what makes sense for you. But once you hit agree, the next pop-up will be automatic downloads. Now, we really like to make sure our users know about this one. This is a feature we added a few years ago, and the biggest benefit is this will automate all your downloads. So it will start with doing all your required downloads to get started with ForeFlight. At any time there's an update and you're connected to the internet, it will automatically download all those updates that you need. That way, you're always up to date along the way, and you can just go out and start flying immediately. So let's talk about how ForeFlight's organized. So ForeFlight's organized in a number of tabs or different views along the bottom of the screen. And the benefit there is we're trying to segment different information along the way. So for instance, you can see that highlighted section on the bottom. We've got airports, maps, charts, documents, imagery, flights, scratch pads, and more. That way, if you're looking for a specific functionality, you don't have to go digging throughout the app to find it. That main tab bar is going to be your main source for navigating through. So let's take a quick minute and we're just going to look through each one of those tabs. So the first is the airports view, and this is going to provide everything that you need to know for an airport. So the way we have this split up is the top portion is going to give you geographic information about the airport, airport's frequencies, buttons like FBO, comments, 3D. That way you have some basic information to get started with the airports. But then when you look at the bottom portion, you're going to have dedicated tabs for different pieces of information. So for instance, we have the frequencies tab, which will have approach frequencies, tower frequencies, weather frequencies as well. And then when we move along, you'll have weather information. So if there's a METAR for that airport, that will be there. It will also include nearby METARs if you scroll down to the bottom. It'll have TAFs if they're available, and then also winds aloft forecast at that specific airport. We'll have runway information that'll include wind information for the runways if available, lighting information, and more. So for instance, with this one in Lyon, it mentions that runway 34 has right traffic pattern. We've got a procedures section. This is where you're going to find airport diagrams and then also procedures organized by type. And this is really important if you're looking for a visual procedure or you're looking for a different diagram of the airport, either from a national provider or from ForeFlight themselves, this is where you're going to find it. And if you have Jeppesen data, this is where it will show too. We have a NOTAM section. We break it up into actually 3 sections. It's going to be airports, obstacles, and FIR. So that's going to be bigger notices for your flight information regions. We have the AIP section. Now this is actually the AD section of the AIP, so the aerodrome section for your specific airport. So if there is a page available in the AIP for the airport, this is where it will live. There is a larger version of this with all the airports, say for Germany, France, Austria, combined in the document section, but this is a great way to skip that step. And then we have the More tab, and this is where you'll find additional information. For instance, customs is available at this airport, what time zone it's in, magnetic variation, and if there's a specific transition altitude. We also note that transition altitude in the top section as well, if available. Now, I just want to stop for just a second on airports. For those of you that saw yesterday, we actually put out a video of some upcoming changes that are coming very soon to ForeFlight. So I just wanted to mention this early on, that those 7 tabs that were along the bottom are actually going to be changing to 5. So there'll be info, weather, runway, procedures, and NOTAM. So most of those are the same, but the More tab and the AIP tab actually work themselves into the general info tab. So you'll see towards the bottom of this view, it says chart supplement. And if I was to scroll down, that's where that AD section of my AIP is today. Okay, let's keep going. So maps, this is the most used view in ForeFlight. So this is your central location for charts, weather, flight planning, and more. And we organize maps in using a layer selector. We actually have two columns. So the column on the left-hand side is going to be specific to maps and charts. This is where you would find the aeronautical layer, which we'll talk about in just a second. That's kind of your key digital layer for data. That's where it's going to have airports, airspace, nav aids. It's going to have VFR approach procedures or departures all in that view. So that's a really key one. We also have street maps, aerial maps, and then we also have scanned versions of what would be like paper charts. We call them raster charts. You have access to those in that section. On the right-hand side, this is going to be overlays on top of those maps. So you're looking at weather information, hazard information, or other informational information, other informational layers, sorry. So things like fuel prices, obstacles. You can have things like what flight categories are for the airport, winds aloft for the entire world. And weather layers like radar, icing, turbulence as well. So we'll talk about those here in just a second too. But I wanted to play a quick video about the aeronautical map. So the biggest thing with this is a dynamic view. So as you zoom in, more and more information comes up on the screen. So for instance, we're zooming into Egelsbach here and we're getting all the way in, and you'll start to see things like parking information come up. You can see that there's a grass runway at this airport. Before, when it was zoomed out, you could see no overfly areas. So it gets really, really detailed as you zoom in. But that's the biggest piece with this. It doesn't redraw the map completely every time. It will continue to give information as you go in. And this data is coming from Jeppesen. So this is both global data and then also has VFR specific data for Europe. So for instance, with this, and we'll get into it more in a bit, there'll be traffic patterns on the map for European airports. There will be entries and exits into those airports, VFR waypoints that will show up on the map, all coming from that information. So we've got the chart section. This is a great way to download and organize procedure charts and airport diagrams if you're doing multiple airports, or say you're doing a long trip and you're going to be going many different places. You can actually create binders, and these binders will keep everything organized for you. You can add any chart that makes sense for your trip in this section. We also have the documents view, and this changed in the last year. So documents is where you keep all your different important documents organized, either by downloading them from a whole catalog of documents that are available with your subscription, or you can bring in your own documents. Like you could bring in your airport manuals. You can add PDFs in here. You can add Word documents as well. So it's a really great space for doing that. Now, one thing I wanted to call out a little bit is in the past, the catalog and the documents were separated from each other. So you would click on the catalog and you would only see what was available to download, and you'd have to close that and then go back to this main view and open them. That's now combined. And you may be able to see in the bottom right or the top left with these thumbnails, there's actually a blue download arrow. And those are letting you know that you do need to download those charts before you can use them. They're not saved on your device. If you get that green circle with the check mark, then you're good to go and they're saved for you. The other benefit of doing this is once you have them downloaded, you'll get all the updates available. And if you have those automatic updates like we talked about, it will do it every single time there's an update to these. We have the imagery section. This is where you're going to find static forecast products for many different regions around the world. So for instance, Central Europe, we're looking at surface level pressure, winds, and cloud cover, also precipitation too. we have the flights view. So this is a form-based alternative to planning on the maps view, where you can file flight plans, amend them, cancel flight plans, get weather briefings, view a waypoint by waypoint breakdown of your flight and the nav log, and then also receive messages related to your flight plan. We've got the Scratchpad section. This is a great thing to start using if you want to take notes in flight or even before your flight. And we'll talk about this a little bit later and how this is beneficial when you're listening to weather broadcasts so that you can take down the ATIS information. And then we've got the More view. That More tab is going to be the home of lots of different capabilities. So this is where basically everything else within ForeFlight lives. So we've got things for both pre-flight, in-flight, and post-flight here. So things like checklist. We've got logbook, weight and balance. You can set up your aircraft here. And then you can also do track logs. If you have any devices that you want to connect up to ForeFlight, we do work with both in-panel and portable avionics devices. You can make sure they're set up in this view too. I did want to take a second and hit on downloads, which is also in this More section. This is really important to know to make sure you have things set up correctly. If you see towards the top, there's actually a section that says download settings. And what you want to make sure to do, and the way that this should work, is it should automatically select your country based on your device location. So for instance, if I was in Germany, it would automatically select the Germany checkbox for me. But if you fly to other regions nearby, say you fly to the Czech Republic, or you fly to Poland, or you fly to Switzerland, it's really important to come in here and make sure you have these different boxes checked for the different regions or countries nearby. The top section of that is always going to have everything checked. So it's going to have aerodrome charts and AIPs, VFR charts, IFR charts, high resolution base map, and high resolution terrain. Those will be selected by default. And once you check those different regions, that's how it will know which sets of data you want to download. That's how we really make sure that we're not overloading your device by letting you pick what you want to download. And again, with that video that came out yesterday, I just want to briefly mention that More view is changing a little bit. So instead of being a full screen view where you'll have 2 columns and see information, here you're going to have a slide out from the side. So you're going to see those same layers that we talked about before in this view. They may be in a slightly different order, but it comes over every screen that you're on, so you can quickly get into something. There's also this dynamic tab that we've added at the bottom. So for instance, with this one, it's got logbook in it. And the reason it has logbook is that was the last view that we chose from the More section. The benefit of that is that it allows you to quickly switch back and forth between different views without having to go into More, select a new view every time, especially if it's something you're planning on switching back and forth between. So there is a benefit to that as well. So I want to take a quick break and take a look at the questions and see what we have here along the way. So here's a good question. So how many EU countries are covered? We actually do have coverage for 42 countries in Europe. Now that coverage does vary from country to country, and it depends on what's available from that country and also what we're hearing from our users. So for instance, with that one is going to vary. Like I said, we do have a great website for it, foreflight.com/Europe. And then if you add another /data, we have a table that explains everything that we have access to. So those are ones that you really want to check out to see what coverage is available for your specific country. Let's see. Are all these features available in the basic version of ForeFlight? There will be a couple things that I'll mention throughout the presentation that may not be available in all different plans, and we'll talk about the breakdown of the plans towards the end of the presentation, but I will call those out along the way if there's something that's not available in the basic plan. The way that I've done this presentation is we're talking mostly about features at the highest level in Pro. So we're not really talking about performance in this presentation. So we're doing basic and Pro here, but I'll call out those ones that exist in Pro only. All right, so let's keep going on and then we'll check back for questions here shortly. All right, so we're going to get into planning and preparing for our next flight. Now that we have everything organized, let's put it into practice. There are a couple things that I'll stop and give some setup tips along the way that will help make your time a lot easier. So things I like to start with, the order when I'm trying to plan a flight, especially if I don't know exactly where I'm going for that day, I go back to the maps view, I go into the layer selector, and I'm going to start toggling through different weather layers. And the reason this is important for me is maybe I can't fly to the north, but I can fly to the south. Same east and west. It's important to know what those trends are doing. It's important to know at altitude what I'll be looking for along the way. So the ones that I tend to use the most is I'm going to turn on the radar layer. And I took these last night when there was some weather coming through southern Germany. And I would start with radar to get an idea of what does it look like along the way? What am I dealing with that flight path? The next ones I would do, especially this time of year where we're still trying to work into summer, is I would look at icing. Now, icing and turbulence are both features of the Pro subscription. They are both forecast layers, and you can actually adjust the altitude so that you can see different levels of altitude along the way. So the benefit of this is if you have a specific planned altitude that you're thinking of, check that, check one above and one below. It will always help you figure out, am I going to run into turbulence along the way if I stay at this altitude, or maybe I need to climb further up. And those forecasts are out up to a day in advance. So it's really important that you look at those. Now, a quick tip with the weather. One thing that you can do is you can also adjust the opacity of these layers, so meaning how transparent will something be. I like adjusting these layers up and down so that I can see through them. Sometimes people don't like that, but that does apply to many layers within the app. So for instance, I just showed turbulence, and then with this example, I've got just a slight transparency put on the radar so I can actually see underneath and see what that terrain looks like. That is really, really nice to be able to have as you're working through this. So something to mention is we do have GAFOR data. It is now 5 countries. It was 6 last year. So Germany, Switzerland, Austria, Croatia, and Slovenia. They're all color-coded, Germany by regions, the other by routes. And as you zoom in, you'll see labels for them, like you can see on here. You are able to tap on those different regions or routes, and it will pop up detailed information about them. What's the current index? What are the cloud-based visibility? And are there any precipitation notes? Not every country provides precipitation notes, but some do. So it's worth checking out to see, hey, it looks marginal. The cloud base looks okay, but oh, there's thunderstorms in the area. That's why I'm getting that marginal. So worth taking a look through. And not quite a weather layer, but it's still in that same overlay section. Graphical NOTAMs is something that we brought out last year. And what we're doing here is we're actually taking text-based NOTAMs that are normally just, this is a point and here's the radius, and we're parsing out the information so that we can show them to you what the actual shape is for that NOTAM. The benefit to a pilot is rather than having a very large circle that would show, hey, you can't fly through this area, that space could be half as large. So that's really, really important to take a look at. Also, with everything that's been going on and military areas active and deactivated pretty constantly, usually towards the evening, but sometimes during the day, especially down here in Austria, because this was this morning. It's really important to be aware of what active airspace you have. Okay, so before we started planning, this is going into one of those tips. So I wanted to mention the map settings. This is a really good place to be aware of. We'll talk about it here, and we're going to talk about it a little bit later when we start doing the in-flight features. The map settings are broken up into a couple sections. So the first section is going to be my base map. So that map that's underneath everything for the entire world, what does that look like? What do I want that to look like? So we have a couple different options here. We have multiple themes. So right now we have the light theme on, which is going to be closer to what people are used to seeing on traditional paper charts. We also have a classic theme, which is a little bit darker. And then we have a dark theme. And the benefit of that is if you do any flying at night, it's going to reduce that cockpit brightness by using the dark theme. We also have different levels of terrain. So you could have no terrain turned on. You could have colored terrain, which is what we're using here right now, or you could have shaded terrain, which is just putting gray shading over that normal base map that you would be used to seeing here. You can also show and hide different labels or information on top of these layers. So for instance, you can see place labels is on here. We could turn that off if it was too much clutter for our current view. You can also adjust the cultural elements where you'll find things like roads, both major and minor, forest information, and more features in that view. So I encourage you to check those out. The other block is aeronautical settings, and this is important because we're going to do some planning here for our flight, but this block only shows when you have the aeronautical layer on. And you can come in here and customize what types of airports you want to see, what types of airspace, if you want to see airways on or off, both high and low, and then also in the US we call them ARTCs, and the rest of the world they call them FIR, so flight information regions, whether you want to see low or high for those as well. But we're going to go into the airspace settings, and we're going to look at a couple things in this view that are going to be important for us. So towards the top, we have two options for actually filtering the airspace we see on the map. So with this, say we weren't going to ever fly above 5,000 feet or 7,000 feet, whatever value makes sense for you and the aircraft you're flying in. You can actually set the hide airspace above in feet to whatever value you want, and it will filter out that airspace as soon as you type in that value. It will also give you a notification on the bottom right-hand corner of the map that you have that filtered, and you can change it directly from the map. That's important because if you do happen to fly, that we've got it at 5,000, you decide to go to 8,000, it would be good to change that value so you could see that information along the way. There's also one in here called auto highlight. Now, airspace, we call this airspace highlighting, and what this actually does is it doesn't get rid of any airspace, but it's just going to dim out airspace that you're not going to be flying through based on the route and the current position of the aircraft. So I just wanted to show what that looks like. So I did just a quick example route from Friedrichshafen to Mannheim, and with airspace highlighting off, this is what you would see. So fairly complicated airspace, but we may not be flying through all of that. So if I turn on airspace highlighting, this is the difference. You're only going to see the airspaces you're flying through. So again, even if you're flying directly above it, if you're high enough above it, it will not highlight that airspace. If you're below it, it will not highlight that airspace, just to clean things up a little bit. And before we get started on flight planning, for those of you that fly locally, this is a really, really nice feature. It's called map annotation. So it's the little pencil that shows up on the left-hand side. What you're able to do is actually draw out areas that would be important for you to know to fly in. So say there's a specific practice area that you like to fly in, or it's designated, but it's not on a chart. This is a great way to do it. If you want to make notes of an area that you want to check out, you can also draw on there. If you have an Apple Pencil, you don't even have to hit the pencil button. You just hold down on the screen, draw what you want, and as soon as you let go, it will automatically turn off. So that's a really great feature to check out for that planning phase. Okay, so let's get into flight planning. So we are going to plan our flight today using touch planning here. And I'm going to take a quick look again at the GAFOR to get an idea of where we can fly. Now, from this point, I'm tapping on Friedrichshafen, and we're going to go to Mannheim based off that other example we showed. So if I tap on that as well, I can add it to my route. So that allows us some basic planning. So we've got a direct flight plan right now. Now, what we're going to look at is how can we adjust that routing? Because direct isn't going to work here, we can't fly through the Stuttgart Class C. They really won't want that or like that, and we really don't want to get fined. What we can do is we can adjust our route. Now, there is this restricted area towards the bottom of our screen. Now, what I did is I pressed and held down on the map and then looked at detail views for that airspace, which let me know that that airspace is currently active. So what I'm doing now is press and holding on the screen, dragging over to the side, and starting to make waypoints that help me to avoid those airspaces. So again, press and hold on the screen, drag to this point, and you'll get this insert into route mode. And what you can do is you can either select nearby waypoints or you can choose coordinates that would show up on the screen. So I'm just going to finish this route up to Mannheim. And we've got lots of little areas where there could be parachute activity. So we're just going to keep moving around those so that we can avoid it. Also taking into account where our entries and exits into Mannheim are. So as you can see on the screen, there's going to be a green and purple dashed line going into Mannheim with a green circle with a triangle. That's actually our entry. It's an entry and exit into Mannheim, and that's what we're going to select for right now. We'll get more information as we get closer to the airport, but that gives us kind of a general flow of where we would want to go. Now, say we want to adjust a point that we have. All you have to do is click and drag on that point, and then it pops up the same box so that you can choose a new point. In this case, we don't want to pick a new point. We're going to leave it as is, but we can also get more information about anything on the aeronautical map that are points by pressing or just tapping and holding on them. You don't even have to press and hold. And that will give you more information along the way. So that's a really good function. If you aren't familiar with an airport and you want to get information, aren't familiar with a nav aid or a waypoint and want to get information, tap on them. If you want to get information about an airspace, that's where that press and hold comes in handy because it will show you everything directly underneath where you pressed. For nearby information, you can also do the same thing. Press and hold anywhere on the map, and the bottom section of that details view will actually show you all the different points nearby, their distance, and their various compass direction away from that current location. Now, when I'm flight planning, I also like to use the profile view. The benefit here of profile is it's going to show you what does the terrain and look along the way, and then also give you a side profile of the altitude. You can click and drag that altitude up and down as we just saw, and you can also tap on airspace. And what that does is it temporarily moves the map to where you tap to highlight so that you can get an idea of where is this along my route. And then, of course, who doesn't like planning for fuel? So it's always interesting to know how much is it going to cost me to get fuel in this location I'm going to. So we can turn on a fuel map layer from the layer selector. I've got 100 low lead turned on right here. And what this allows me to do is see various fuel prices in the area, and they are color coded by that specific region that you're looking at. You can go in and you can tap on the airspace, or sorry, on the fuel, and there's an option to get more information. From this view, if you land somewhere and the price isn't correct, there is an update fuel price button. If you hit that button, make sure to update the fuel price, make sure it's in the correct currency, and once you're back connected, either via cellular or the internet or Wi-Fi connection, you can actually submit that fuel price and our team will verify it, make sure it's not vastly different, and then we'll update those fuel prices. We're also contacting these different airports and getting up-to-date fuel prices as well. Okay, so let's take another Q&A break. That'll get us through the basics of touch planning. with ForeFlight. Again, if you're looking for more information, how to get automated routes, those are things you really want to join that power user session next week or wait for the recording to come out. So let's take a look at some of the flight planning questions we've been getting all along the way. Yes, so here's one. So is auto highlight dynamic? If you were to divert off course, it would show potential airspace infringements. Yes, it will do that. So say if you were off course, or if you were to go to a higher or lower altitude, that will automatically change for you. So it's not just based on the route, it's also aircraft current position. So that's a really good one to know. Let's see. Do I need VFR charts to use normal flight planning in Europe? For example, if I buy the Basic Plus package, but I need more, can I upgrade? I'm not sure if I need all the add-ons. I'm a VFR hobby pilot. Well, it really depends. So one, you don't have to buy the Jeppesen VFR charts if you don't want to. If that's something you're used to, you can buy them. You can always add them on later. You can always go back and adjust your subscription so you're not locked in to anything there. So if you choose to move up from Basic Plus to Pro Plus, you can do that. Or if you want to add on those charts, you can do that at any time. Now, the information that's on those Jeppesen VFR charts, most of that is already on the aeronautical layer, and we'll look at that a little bit here at the end. I want to do a little bit live on my iPad towards the end and show you what that looks like, but you will have that information there. So my advice is use the aeronautical layer first, see if that provides you the information that you need, and then make that decision. The other is make sure you have all your downloads done for that region you're looking for to make sure that that information is there in the airport section, because we also just added additional airport textual information coming from Jeppesen. We've added it inside the procedure section on the airport side. So if you go to airports, there'll be a ForeFlight section that'll say airport info. Make sure you're checking there. That will again have that text information coming from those Jeppesen charts. Let's see. Okay, for sake of time, I'm going to keep moving. We'll keep answering your questions via the chat, but I'm going to keep going on because we've got some more sections to clear. Now, from here on, I'm going to move through the various sections, talking about in-flight and then post-flight, and then we'll come back and do questions at the end. So bear with me for just a few more minutes here. All right, so it's time to fly. Here are a few things I do as soon as I get into the aircraft and are best for doing, and then also some pieces for in-flight that I want you to be aware of that are especially helpful in different regions of Europe. So first, recording your weather information using the ATIS Scratchpad template. So if you go into Scratchpad and hit the plus sign, there is an option for an ATIS template, and it breaks up the way that you would get that information over the weather frequencies in here. So all you have to do is fill in the blank or circle options. So for information about sky coverage or otherwise, you can just circle the ones that you want. You can also write in these large boxes so that you can capture all that information. It makes it a lot easier than having to bring a separate piece of paper or opening your knee pad and writing in there quickly. It's a centralized place for doing it. And the next time you come in here, you can leave just one open. You can just hit clear and start over. You don't have to go add a new template every time. Another good thing to be aware of before you fly is track log recording. So there's actually a button on the map that says record and has time underneath it. When it's not recording, it'll say 0 as far as time goes. But this will automatically start when the app detects a takeoff. You can also push this record button to start and stop recordings. Now, that automated detection of the app, realizing there's a takeoff, it's always listening in the background. So it will record things before your takeoff back, I believe, 30 minutes. So it'll also get in that taxi time as well. So that's also helpful later when you're going back and reviewing, so you can get a full picture. And I'll show you that when I show you an example track log that I have and what that looks like. And now when you are flying, we don't have an in-flight mode versus a planning mode. It just automatically does some of these features. So again, that track log recording, we're going to look at instrument panel here in just a second. Those things just start working as it's getting information. Now with this view, the moving map display, I'm gonna go back to start that one over just again. What this will do for us, sorry, here we go. What this allows us to do is we can change the view that we're seeing on the aeronautical layer depending on what we prefer. So by hitting in the top right-hand corner that centers on the aircraft, just below it is a compass, you can do track up, or you can actually have it follow the actual route that you're taking. And sorry, it's track up or north up. So right now, the current view is track up, so it's following our track directly south into Switzerland. So if you prefer that, you can. And you'll notice the benefit of using the digital charts is everything is rotating along the way. So we don't have to turn our heads, turn the iPad, anything like that. So all the labels are already flipped over for us. Now the instrument panel is one you can turn on from the top nav bar. When you actually enable this, what it does is it pops up instruments on the bottom of the screen. So you can change these. There will be a default setting when you go in. Some of those are going to be like GPS accuracy, what's your ETE to your destination, what's your current ground speed, and GPS altitude. But if you tap on any one of those, they can all be changed. And there's a huge list to choose from in there. So I would say that's a great place, especially if you're not as familiar with ForeFlight. This is something you can do on the ground. You don't have to do this once you're up in the air. Play with it, get it set up, and know that they can change quickly and easily. Now, I know I said previously we were going to come back and look at settings again, so the map settings. There are some really nice features that you can turn on that are helpful for in-flight now. So if you were to scroll down past that aeronautical settings, you're going to have two blocks. I'm not going to touch much on the auto center mode. That's what we were just talking about with the moving map, where your default can be track up forward, north up, or track up centered. The difference between forward and centered is where your aircraft icon shows, either in the center of the screen or towards the bottom, so you see more information in front of you. The map overlays section, this is really important. So a couple that we're going to touch on here. So distance rings. What's really nice about distance rings is by default, it will automatically adjust as you zoom out. So you can see it getting bigger and bigger and bigger as we zoom out. But you can also tap on these rings and change the style that you want. So maybe you want to set a fixed value. Maybe you want to set something that's time-based. You have that freedom to make that change while you're in flight. You don't have to go anywhere else to make a setting. You just need to make sure that it's enabled. A very popular feature, especially for those who are flying in terrain or as in general as an added safety feature, is glide advisor. And by adding in the best glide speed and glide ratio for your aircraft, it will take into account altitude, speed, wind information if available, and terrain information to calculate a dynamic glide ring. So you'll see that ring change shape as you're flying along or changing direction. It will automatically update to keep you informed if something were to happen, where could I glide to? There is a slight buffer, so that ring is actually a little bit smaller, and that's for safety purposes. But this is something that we hear from pilots all the time, that they just leave this on. And it's a great thing to just keep track of along the way. Breadcrumbs, this is a newer feature. What this allows you to do is visually see where you've been. So kind of going off that question we got earlier about what if I deviate from my route, this is a great way to see that deviation directly on the map as it's happening, rather than waiting to review your track log at the end. So for instance, say you're doing some pattern work, this is also very helpful to see how precise were you each pass as you were going along. So lots of different use cases there. Extended center lines. This is especially helpful if you're in an area that has lots of information on the map. You can actually extend the center lines. They'll do it for all the airports. They're tappable, so you can select the runway that you're coming into, and it will highlight along the way. So that way, you know, for this example, you know, runway 12, that is going to be the runway that I'm landing on. So I just want to highlight that so I don't go to 30. Something we added recently was airspace frequencies because it was a request that was coming out of Europe. Knowing what frequencies you need to contact before entering an airspace, whether that be a CTR or a TMA, knowing that information ahead of time. So by pressing and holding down on the map, you again will see the list of all the airspace underneath where you pressed. For instance, this one we want to get the frequency for the Friedrichshafen CTR. We can see the first frequency there plus one more. What that lets us know is there are multiple frequencies that we could potentially contact. If we were to hit details, it would show us all the available frequencies. For some areas that are more complicated, especially like Paris is a really good example. There are many different frequencies there, but it's giving you all the potential options that you could contact if you needed help or you didn't catch a frequency. It's a great list to be able to go back and look into. And again, this came from feedback from pilots like you. So keep providing that feedback and we'll keep adding it into the app. I want to talk a little bit and just quickly about global hazard awareness. So we were talking about in-flight profile previously. Again, you get to that by clicking on that FPL button in the top navigation and then going into the profile view. And there's a couple different options here. So the first one, just like when we were flight planning, will show our route, but our route line is going to change colors just like it does on the map view. We can also see an aircraft in that mode. Now, say if we were to deviate from our route, our cross-track error would actually come up and let us know that we've deviated and that aircraft will fade out because you're not actually on that route anymore. If you don't have a route or you just want to see what's down track, we also have a button. So these are in the top left corner. You'll see an aircraft and a little route icon. You can switch back and forth between them. This will show you down track, what does the profile view look like? So for instance, I know I'm not going to fly into this mountain, you know, on the Swiss-Austrian border. I know that this is extending beyond, but at least gives me an idea that I can't fly straight. So I really shouldn't deviate from that route. So that's a really important one as well. Or again, if you don't have a route in place, this is a great view to have open when you're flying so you can anticipate what's coming down track. The other piece I wanted to touch on here is the ruler, and this is another function that works both in profile and works directly on the map. So all you have to do to activate this is take two fingers and put them directly on the map and hold down. That will bring up a ruler, and what that ruler does for us, I'm going to go back again just so we can see this video. What this will do for us is this is going to show It will show the ruler on the screen. It'll give us heading information, distance based on where our fingers are, and the profile view will change based on what we're showing in the view. So the biggest benefit to that is if you are looking at what does terrain look like in this area, you can just use the ruler to see that without altering your route in any way, because we don't want you to change your route and then it changed something along the way. Just use that ruler. And this is something they're going to go into more detail in the power users, but I still wanted to mention it, Hazard Advisor. So this is another layer that you can turn on, again, in that right-hand column in the layer selector. And what this does is it uses those terrain downloads that we were talking about before. Again, that information is available globally and comes from Jeppesen. What it does is it will actually highlight using both yellow and red to indicate areas that you are potentially going to intersect. So for instance, again, flying into southern Switzerland or northern Switzerland from Germany, we have lots of terrain going on. So this is trying to help us get through those mountains. And the benefit of Hazard Advisor here is you can also tap on obstacles. So it will show up show obstacles that may be along your path. If you tap on them, you can see what type of obstacle, is it lit, how high above the ground, how high above sea level is that obstacle. So it's important to just keep track of those sorts of things. Now, there is much more when it comes to in-flight modes. So I would advise you guys come back, do the power users course, or again, watch that video when it comes out. But there will be more that we can't get into today because there's a lot that you can do from the app. I did want to mention, because lots of people fly with friends who maybe aren't pilots, or you fly with your family. Last year, we did release a companion app that's free, so anybody can go and download this. It's called Passenger. What you're able to do is actually share real-time flight information with your passengers. So say if they're just curious, what's out the window, or are we there yet? They can figure this all out from the back seat or the right seat as well. They just need to have an iOS device, download the Passenger app from the store before going out and flying, and you can, within ForeFlight, there's a passenger section. You can share your information with those passengers. So really good thing to read up on. Again, it's free, and we've heard great reviews from those who fly with a family and friends. Okay, couple quick post-flight things because I want to wrap up track logs and why we do that recording. Next week's power user, we'll talk about this a little bit more, but I want to show why and how you can find those track logs before next week. So if you go into more and you go to track logs, this will show you a list of every track log that you have recorded in the past. And these do synchronize automatically between devices. You don't have to share them with another of your own devices. These will be here by your account. So I'm going to choose one of mine, and this was a particularly interesting flight here in the Austin area in Texas. The benefit of this is I could review my flight, see my path of where I went. There's a graph at the bottom that will show me altitude information and speed information, so that you can really get a sense of what was your flight like along the way. So this is a really, really cool feature. One last thing to share about it is you can share this with your family or friends by going to the Send To button in the top right. You will get a pop-up that allows you to email this information to someone, or if you click foreflight.com, it will actually open a web link directly on your iPad. And what that will do is it will give you a web page that you can share with family and friends. And again, it will be on a map, so you'll have all that information there too. Okay, so we're getting here towards the end, where I'm going to wrap up on a couple things, and we're going to go right back into Q&A. So what's coming? So we get this question all the time about, when are you going to have this feature, or when is that coming out? If you are new to ForeFlight, it is really important to know we actually do releases every month, and we don't do small releases. We're typically fairly large with new features for varying groups of pilots every month. So airspace frequencies just came out recently. Again, a European focus feature, but also had benefits for pilots in the US, Canada, or the rest of the world. We also added those Jeppesen airport information documents. That came out last month, so that again is only a European feature. So those things are coming down the line. So if a feature hasn't come out that you're interested in or you're looking for, just bear with us. Here's what's coming out. So I can't go into a ton of detail with these, but I do want to let you know things we've been hearing, and we know and so you all know we're working on them. Airspace alerts, we get that a lot because of the dense airspace in Europe, and we completely understand that as a necessary feature. So that's one that's on our list. Profile route line updates. So there's been lots of questions about how would I see adjusted altitudes for different legs in my profile view. That's another one there. We're going to be doing more features with NOTAMs on there, so that'll be coming. More details on the base map. Recently, we just released passes, and then we also released motorway shields. So now if you're flying along major motorways in Europe, as long as you have the high-res base map downloaded, you'll be able to see little signs for where those motorways are. So it's just another thing that helps with any of that VFR planning if you're flying along a road, knowing what it is. We have more flight planning options coming soon. There are many, many different asks by many different types of pilots, so we're not going to get into those, but know that we are continuing to work on that. And then more European specific features. So any of those features that we're getting of, I'm missing specific airports, we're working on those. We are working on adding VFR waypoints or visual reporting points in a way that will make it easier for finding those points in the application. So we are listening and we are doing work there. It just takes some time. So just bear with us and we'll keep having features come out soon. And again, as you saw or haven't seen, which you should go check, we had a video come out yesterday explaining the new changes coming out to the UI. It's about a 6.5, 7-minute video. It's worth looking at. We have some great updates coming to the iPhone, great updates coming in the app, but it's important to be ahead of those changes before they come out. So definitely take a look there. Okay. So last piece is if you're interested in what comes in the different plans, so we talked about this a little bit. One that I just realized I forgot to mention is the profile view is a Pro Plus feature. It is not included in Basic Plus. That is one, this website, foreflight.com/pricing, is a great place to get information of what is included in each plan. And it is very detailed. If you scroll down, you can actually open up and it will describe what each one of these things are and give you check marks for each of our different subscriptions. So it's a really good place to start. We do offer both euros and British pounds as far as currency for when you're paying for your subscription. So there are options. So anybody in the UK, I apologize that this is only in euros on the screenshot, but you can pay in pounds as well. Something we didn't get too deep into is there are different custom add-ons that you can add. So say you have a particular chart provider that you like, if you're using Rogers charts or you're using charts that are coming from DFS or otherwise, and you like those, you can add them underneath any of these layers. They are an additional charge. That's because they have to be licensed, but you have the choice to add these. We're not requiring you to have this. Again, we're putting majority of this information already on the aeronautical layer, and you can substitute it by turning on other layers. Like we have an obstacles layer that you can enable as well. Those things are there. So keep an eye out for that. And just so everybody knows, we do have a really great pilot support team. They are available 7 days a week, team@foreflight.com. We've got folks in the US, Mexico, Canada, Europe, and other various places in the world as well. So we've got people to talk to. And this team is they're all pilots. So they will know some of the situations that you are facing. So definitely worth chatting with all of them. Now we're going to get into the final part of Q&A here. I've got a couple links that are important to know, so I would jot those down so that you have them. So great place to foreflight.com/videos to look at those. Latest blog information about what's coming out, blog.foreflight.com, and again, team@foreflight.com for more information. Okay, so let's get into the final questions and let's take a look. And I apologize if we don't answer all your questions today. I will definitely, apologies about that. I will definitely try to get through as many of these because there are some that are similar. Okay, got it. So here's a good one about flight planning. Why are some track lines yellow, some magenta, and some cyan? So what we're trying to do is we're trying to color code where you are on your route. So the ones that are yellow or kind of that orange color, those are things that you've already passed. Magenta is your current leg of a route, and cyan are the ones that are coming up. That way you have an idea of what you've already completed along the way. let's see. So lots of questions about misnamed or missing VFR waypoints. Again, that is one that we're working on right now. The VP285, those types of codes are so that we can get those waypoints in, but we're working to get the correct names and a way to route with them that will make more sense for European pilots. So be looking for those updates in the future. There was a note, greetings from Portugal, hello. How does fuel consumption planning work? Come to the power users class. That's not one we're gonna talk about here, but it's definitely a great one to take in power users. How do you change the altitude of your route and have multiple altitudes in your route? So I'm gonna go, let me pause this for just a second. I'm going to open up my iPad and we can take a look at that together for just a moment. And then I also want to show just quickly the aeronautical map like we were talking about. So let me get this started. All right, looks like you can all see my iPad and it's turned to the side to make it a little bit easier to see. So going back to the route we had yesterday, which we have this star and clock button at the top. This actually will show us favorites and recents. So we're going to go into recents. I'll find my Friedrichshafen to Mannheim route and say I want to change the altitude of any of these points that I'm going to be flying. So this SUL, if I tap on it, there is a button that says set altitude and speed. You don't have to set the speed, but you can change the altitude. So if you look over on the left-hand side of my flight plan, you'll see, and I'm highlighting it right now, you'll see 6,000 feet. So that's my planned altitude. But I could go into SUL and say, actually here, I plan to climb to 8,000 and hit done. And what you'll see is it will put in flight level 80. So that way you're knowing at that point you're going to climb. Now in the profile view currently, it does not show that information, but we are working on it, like I mentioned, and the update's coming soon. But on the map, it will note the flight level. So that way you know you need to be at that altitude by that point or starting from that point. So you can make those updates here. While we're here, again, I wanted to show you a little bit more about what details are here in the map. So I'm going to use some examples down in Switzerland because we've got some interesting terrain that we can turn on as well. So this is the airport we were looking at earlier. I'm just going to hide airspace. You also have these buttons over here on this left-hand side so you can quickly declutter. So I'm just turning off the airspace. We'll see the green lines coming in. Those are going to be entries into the airport. The light purple lines are leaving the airport. The white lines, including the white arrows, are going to be traffic patterns. So this particular airport has a different traffic pattern if you're entering runway 12 or if you're departing from runway 30. So keep that in mind when you see those arrows. You'll also see this yellow traffic pattern. These are for gliders, and we do have little labels that will come up as you zoom in so you can get that information along the way. These light red areas, those are avoid overflying areas. So just keep an eye out for that. And while we're in Switzerland, a couple base map things to note. We recently added cable lines that were coming from the JEP VFR data. We also added, let's see if I can find one, we added passes. So this is a pass that you can actually fly through. So this is also coming from the Jeppesen VFR data. And then here's an example of one of those motorway shields that we were talking about before. So thanks for bearing with me on that. I just want to show you that information while we were here. We'll come back to it in just a second if we need it. I'm just going to switch back to my slide deck for the QA page, and we will keep going. All right, so let's see what else we have in the question list today. Okay, so lots of maps and plate questions. Can we have both the Swiss VFR 1 to 500 and the French VFR 1 to 500 chart on the same time? We often fly from Switzerland to France and must change in the menu for the VFR chart. Currently, no. Those you can't do that at the moment, but that is something that we can take into account, and we appreciate the feedback. There are other charts that do allow you to do that. They're not coming from France or Switzerland. They are coming from third parties. So the Cartabassi charts will do both France and Switzerland in a single chart. It's at a 1 to 1 million scale though. Same with the Air Million charts. So there are a couple different options there. But if you were to use the national charts, you will have to switch, but that's something we can definitely take a look at how to do. There is an option in the app when you have multiple charts that overlap. So say on the IFR charts, especially different countries, they will overlap, where you can do map touch action, and that will bring one to the front or the back. So we'll look into that. So I used ForeFlight on my last trip. My aircraft was moving over the screen, but the map was not moving automatically with my trip. What do I have to do? So that button in the top right-hand corner, I'm going to pause and we'll go back to the app for just a second. Bear with me for just a moment. Okay, so this button in the top right-hand corner, I'm highlighting it on the screen right now, next to the search bar, that is going to pull, well, it's going to pull me where I live in the US. But what that will do when you're in flight is it will actually center and continue moving the map along the screen with you. So that's all you have to do is press that button in the top corner and make sure that it's blue, lighter blue, and that will track your movement on your flight. Let me switch back. All right. Let's see what else we have in the list. Got it. When you draw in an area on the map, so that's that map annotations that we were talking about, does it zoom in and out? So you cannot zoom in and out while you're in that mode. Actually, you can. You can take 2 fingers and zoom in and out, or you can press on the zoom buttons. Let me just double check to make sure on the zoom in and out. So yes, so if you put 2 fingers on the screen and pinch in or out while annotating, you can zoom in and out in that mode. Let's see. What settings do I have to see mountains in yellow or in red in relation to my altitude? Is that the mountain symbol on the left side or hazard advisor? I tried both, but I saw nothing changing. So hazard advisor is the one that will change the red and the yellow, and it works in flight. It does not work on the ground. So you will get a little warning in red in the bottom corner that lets you know that you have to be in flight for that to start lighting up. So you may not see that. The mountain symbol that showed up on the left, that's actually turning terrain on and off on the base map. So whether you previously had colored or shaded terrain, that's what that's doing there. Now, one other thing that I just want to mention to everybody is if you go to ForeFlight.com and go to the support section, there's great information about how to use ForeFlight with simulators. Also, ForeFlight.com/on-frequency, we did a webinar about how to connect ForeFlight to flight simulators, many popular flight simulators. So that way you can try some of these functions out while you're on the ground in your own desk chair. Try all of these things out, but that's a really great example of one it's great to try while you're on the ground to get a feel for it. Where can I store, save, and later retrieve the track logs? The track logs, like I mentioned, they're automatically synchronized. So as long as you're recording a track log and finishing a recording, it will stop after it's detected a landing, or you hit the record button to stop a track log, it shows up in more track logs. And so there's nothing you need to do differently to save them. They're just automatically saved as long as you stop that recording. Let's see. So here's one. I've used Jeppesen Mobile Flight Deck VFR for quite some time and much appreciated its maps. For those of you that don't know, that was recently sunset and ForeFlight became the replacement app. ForeFlight seems much more cluttered to me. Can I declutter them? Yes. So using some of those approaches we talked about earlier, airspace filtering, going into the aeronautical settings and turning off specific things, that's going to help with decluttering. Outside of that, we have heard some requests for being able to turn off Class E and G airspace in Europe, and we're looking into that as well. Let's see, I'm looking for a function to issue a timer with an alert in ForeFlight when I have to switch from tank 1 to 2 and vice versa. Is there a function available? Currently, no. However, with the updates that are coming out that I mentioned, the video came out yesterday, you will be able to split your screen and you can actually have the iOS timer up, set a timer for 30 minutes or whatever time makes sense for you, and be able to switch so you can have that on the side as well. So that's a really interesting one to look at. Let's see. Some parts of the UI are translated into German, but only very few items. Why this ratio? Is there a future plan to have multi-language support for the complete UI? Right now, no. So we've just translated the main views that you would see. So any of the ones that exist along the bottom, and then also we're working on translating more within the more menu. We do not currently have plans to translate the full application into different languages at this point, especially the potential of variations per country. It would become a very, very long list for those that speak the same language but slightly differently. So at the moment, no. I want to filter valid airspace by time. Is that possible? Not currently either. The best use case is by turning on that NOTAM layer to see what airspace is active. It will also show you upcoming activity of airspace, but at the moment we don't have a way to say only show what's active. But that feedback has been given, and we have that on our list to look at. Can we get a notification by entering and leaving a CTR? We talked about that as an upcoming feature, airspace alerts, so be on the lookout for that. Is there a possibility to see live weather in flight? Yes. If you go to foreflight.com /connect, what that will do is that will show you all the avionics that we currently support. In Europe, we actually support products from GOLSA, and GOLSA uses iridium-based satellites to deliver weather information, and it works directly in ForeFlight. So if you already use GOLSA products, or if you're interested in getting in-flight weather information, you can get more information on our website about that. Let's see, I'm gonna take one more. Can we file our flight plan already, or is there any charge? There is no charge for filing flight plans within ForeFlight. So we don't make you buy a package and you get 5 or anything like that. It is included in your subscription. We do support VFR and IFR filing. We can also give you paper printouts of an ICAO form within the application as well. So there are options for that. But how to file those flight plans, come to the power user session next week or wait for that video to come out. That will give you more information. All right, and with that, I'm going to go ahead and sign off here. So I appreciate everybody attending the webinar today. We got through the vast majority of your questions. If you didn't get your questions asked this time, please feel free to send them to team@foreflight.com, and with any questions you have in the future as well, and we'd be more than happy to answer those for you. Thanks, everybody, and have a great rest of the evening.